the last speaker, and hopefully we have more questions.
Thank you very much. Chris, we did a scoping review, so it was a desktop exercise, but let's find out what we found. Most of the wellbeing literature is published from a quantitative research perspective. So we're interested in what qualitative researchers are finding, especially in Africa. Angelina Wilson-Fadiji cannot be here. She's stuck in the UK. She would have loved to have been here. So what did we do? With this, we would like to summarize, and we did, and present literature findings from empirical studies concerned with the well-being of positive psychology, conducted from using qualitative research methods from Africa. I'm going to pay attention to these four things, and hopefully I can do the conceptual focus areas, the ontological and epistemological lenses or positions that the researchers took, the distribution of the studies as to where they were conducted, among whom, as well as the theoretical conclusions and contributions to positive psychology as a whole. But why does this matter? Why is it important? For two things, really. One is this methodological angle. The qualitative researchers would dislodge and challenge the universalistic models that are often imposed on data through wanting to situate their inquiry and respect the contextual knowledge that comes up from there. That's the first thing. The second is the geographical and sociocultural location. This having been conducted in Africa would offer the world something unique from here. An example, I use the studies of hope here, and very briefly, what you see on this side is people who have been using mainly just quantitative research instruments, using the model of Snyder, and here they use the items from that measuring instrument and ask them qualitatively to participants. And here at the bottom, they asked people, at the middle rather, they asked people, what do you think hope is? And therefore, from bottom up, people could inform what hope is. And lastly, an Afrocentric model of hope was developed. So you can move right from quantitative work, where you're imposing models, right up to theory development through asking people what this thing means. So the questions that we had were the following, and I hope to have answered these by the end of the presentation. Who is doing the research, from where and among whom? What is the conceptual focus, area of interest, or applying what theoretical framework, ontological lens, and what methods were used? These are more pragmatic questions, really. More of substance is the following. What are the key conclusions that they've arrived at, and what becomes a contribution then to well-being studies from here? The background is the following, that an African-centered positive psychology ought to not only center Africa, the African person and her experience of being in the world as an object, but also as a subject who participates in knowledge generation. This is one work that we did recently, a bibliometric review of positive psychology well-being research in Africa. We reviewed both quantitative and qualitative research work. So I'm going to use that as a background, a stepping stone for a little bit. So this is what we found, looking at how positive psychology publications have grown since 1985 until last year, with being produced by African scholars. You can see that since 2005 there has been a huge rise in interest in well-being studies here. And of course, it's not unique in itself. I think it's a good thing, but it also comes with the introduction of a new field there. What is unfortunate, though, is that this blue line here, that's South African research. And the rest, they're not following by far. I think Ghana is on the rise now, but still far from what South Africans are producing. These are keywords that would have been used in the research, and the keywords used by the authors themselves. So that is the background. That's almost finding out what exists in well-being literature from Africa generally. So pertaining to our own study, these are the keywords that we used. Very important, and anyone else who wants to do further work, we excluded the words resilience and we excluded quality of life studies. When we did include them initially, they created large bubbles of their own, showing that there are related fields, but these are separate fields. So we do not have a review on literature, on resilience, and on quality of life. I know that Linda Teron had something a few years ago. I'm not sure if there's something recent at the moment. Probably Valerie Mola also has something to that effect. So this Prisma model is what we applied. We started off with 1,879 articles, and we ended up with 53 that met the criteria for inclusion. So the 53 articles is what we read. And this is what I'm going to then work with in the next 10 minutes with you. So in table 1, we organized information into who the authors were, what the target populations and the place was, the conceptual focus, meaning that the constructs of interest that they were interested in, the theoretical framework or ontological lens, which many authors unfortunately do not declare, the epistemological lens in table 2, the methods, the design, especially how they collected and analyzed their data, and then the key conclusions and what we interpret as what would be the contribution to global positive psychology. So let's see what, I'm giving this as an illustration of what we would have done. So number 1, 2, and 3, this runs up to 53. So this is just an illustration from table 1 as to what we did. I'm not displaying an illustration of table 2. So what are we finding here is that, so when we ask the question, what concepts are being studied, you find spikes, the largest being psychological well-being as multidimensional, and that includes flourishing. But people are then interested in studying meaning in life, and they're interested in studying hope. What was a surprise for me is that they're interested in studying subjective well-being qualitatively. You would expect that they're easily, this is to do with emotions really, emotions and happiness, what you call hedonic well-being, the measuring instruments, very easy. Dinard gave us in 1985 already that satisfaction with life scale, 5 items, and things like gratitude, which comes out about 3 times, and this is mainly the work of Tarina Guze, and then interventions. So there are other constructs that you would have expected them to be studied qualitatively, but subjective well-being came on top. Here at the bottom, you find, and this is, again, shows research gaps. One each of these studies on self-compassion, that's a Pravani Naidu, I think she came from the University of the Free State. Self-compassion, self-efficacy, humor, grit, forgiveness, and positive psychology, that was Eva Ilov. Why are you not studying something like forgiveness qualitatively? So if you're interested in that, that's something that can be done. There is no studies there. So this is basically a graphical illustration of what I've just discussed. All right. Which countries are involved? Unfortunately, primarily South Africa. It means that in other parts of the continent, not much work is being done. Kopan, as you are chasing Tebe Galafing's record, can we do a little bit of more of this work across the continent? I think our search underrated Ghana, there's far more work being done there now, but elsewhere you're seeing one of each. Who are they studying? And this is then important because we need more work in the general community population. We are still studying a lot of university students. So university students, community-based adults, children, adolescents, teachers and police, business executives and other employees, as well as unemployed graduates. And I'm going to read this for theoretical framework and ontology, that most studies adopt a deductive reasoning approach and the attitude that leans on the already established models to test and have the findings show a convergence or a divergence and even a contradiction with a development of emic or contextual or contextualized explanations for why things differ from that which is in the West. I'm going to problematize that later. It's hugely problematic. What are they studying? So when we say that they do work deductively, it means that they've got these models that they're imposing on the data. And these are the models that positive psychology has known since its inception in about 1999, 2000. Meaning in Life by Steger, Schnell, Hope, Snyder, Satisfaction, rather Subjective Wellbeing, Dinner, Van Riff, Neff, Seligman, Keyes, Baker, and Kage on environmental subjective work. Therefore, it means that we are saying that there are people elsewhere who are experts on our well-being and our lives, and we cannot simply go to Lesotho and ask people, how are things being done here, and cite Mahlaku and Paul and Saboy, without needing to be confirmed by a Seligman. We don't need that. Does not mean that erasure or ignoring that which exists. But it's about time we learned to write from here without necessarily needing to either converge or diverge or contradict what exists elsewhere. There can be an independent voice which respects the data that you've collected and speak for it. Okay. These two were good examples for me at least. This comes from Vets, and that I think Sherrington is at Rhodes. This on Hope and Ukpumelela from Kaide. Now, let's look at the methods. The epistemology. Many studies do not declare what they used. However, social constructivism, interpretivism, and phenomenology were used to describe, explain, and explore. And some of these methods were used, mainly individual semi-structured interviews, but thematic analysis, discourse analysis, something called I-poem, something called the Mocha method, case studies, content analysis, and so on were used. Now, something like I-poem was quite unique, but the Mocha method is an indigenously developed method from here by Vera Rose. So having said this, and I've said my 2 cents, let's look at what Versen says. And excuse me if I always go to Versen for very obvious reasons. Both in the case of positive psychology and post-disciplinary well-being trajectories, future researchers will need to reflect on and take cognizance of the role of meta-theoretical assumptions or worldviews on their selected empirical foci, preferred methodologies, processes of theory development and verification, as well as how these are intermingled and can be changing over time in the process of knowledge generation. This challenges us to have our own philosophical grounding that informs how we do research and what then informs what we find. It has to come from here. So let's look at the trends for qualitative research. Remember, I gave trends for global. For qualitative research, you are finding that since 2018, more researchers are interested in doing qualitative studies in well-being studies. Who is doing the most work? Vicky Kuhn, Northwest, Mason, Osei Tutu, University of Ghana, Emma Ilof, Magivesen, Valerie Mola. Please find yourself on this list next time if you look at this in 10 years' time. And these are the keywords that we find when we look at their work. Let's discuss this quickly. Now, the key findings stand on two legs. One is that these qualitative researchers have done work that amplify the lived experiences and perceptions of ordinary people. And two, they tell us how knowledge, or what knowledge is socially constructed from the ground up, and it can be contextualized. All right. What do we then know as a result of having done this work? One is that well-being of other non-human systems matters for its own sake. This is what Matlak was talking about regarding nature. And it is intertwined with that of the humans. Therefore, there is something that we can call interconnectedness for well-being of humans and nature, and not necessarily because humans depend on nature, but for its own sake. Number two, that there ought to be the relational and collective is always foregrounded. So self-identity is always intertwined with the interaction with others and a sense of community. Third, that well-being includes contextual materiality, which includes the resources that facilitate life. Fourth, sustainability-oriented well-being themes comprise materiality and peace of mind. That's primarily from the work in Ghana, and we saw snippets of that from Lesotho. Thus, decolonial, emancipatory, transformative, participatory visual methods ought to be what we need to do in the future. I think with your film this morning, we saw that. What are the implications? One, we need to move very quickly towards theory building. Number two, greater operationalization of the representation of knowledge and experiences from here in our measuring instruments. Number three, that intervention programs need to include Africa-centered knowledge that is culturally relevant. Number four, we need to liberate ourselves from the ethic models that come from the weird contexts. Number five, we need to write from here to the world beyond just providing a response or a reaction to what the West said. I mean, those lines in these articles that we found this in Africa and it's different from what the West does and so on. We don't need to be in conversation with that. We don't need to be responding to it. We can write with authority from here. Consider philosophical contributions to African-centered positive psychology. And lastly, let's please do more studies from across the continent, including especially outside of South Africa. So, well, I had to do this. Even in this review, I consider it somewhat of a critique of the qualitative research work that has been done. One, that there is less of it, and two, that is still obsessed with responding to the West instead of writing from here with authority. Therefore, I say that there is the ideal, but it still remains a failed attempt. However, the struggle needs to continue. So we need to do more towards an Africa-centered positive psychology. Thank you very much.